Hello there. He's Ralph, and I'm Peter. So let's do this. Welcome to this edition of Peter and Ralph's weekly chat. So we are going to be talking about three things today. So firstly, we're going to be talking about Ralph's favourite subject, his tie collection. Only joking. No, it's actually inflation. Woohoo! Yeah. Okay, but it's good. I promise you. So the second thing is we will be talking about China, looking at additional ways to restrict kids' use of tech devices. So no more gaming for them. Is the sort of thing that we're looking at here, and then the third thing is weight loss drug suits, weight loss drug lawsuits. There you go. Right. Anyway, so with the let's kick off with the first subject. What is your favourite tie? No, sorry. What actually? What is it?
Well, I was going to
Do you have
talk
one?
about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm having these sort of smaller ties now,
Okay.
classic Rat Pack. I mean, obviously nobody in our audience will have a vague idea what I'm even referring to. Actually, even I'm too young for that. That's
Yeah.
something to say.
Yeah.
No, anyway, so yeah, moving on. Nobody wants to hear this.
Yeah. So anyway, right. We'll talk about this whole. Bank of England. They decided to follow the ECB and the Fed and increase their interest rates by 0.25%. Everyone and their dog expected that, and so it happened. And yeah. So I mean, what would you like to say about that?
um, yes, it's a running commentary on a developing situation. So
Yeah.
apologies for banging on about interest rates and inflation yet again, but it is just important, I think, to keep on the ball and just to see what the developments are. Um, Now, as Peter said, the Bank of England has increased interest rates by 25 bips. I'm going to use this jargon word bips. It stands for
Hmm.
0.1%.
Yeah.
So 25 bips is 25 basis points, and it means 0.25%. Anyway,
Hmm.
so the Bank of England raised interest rates by 25 bips. As you said, this was a move which was very widely expected, but as always with widely expected moves, there was an outside chance that they might have increased it by 50 bips. Nobody quite believed it, but if it had happened, that would have been very negative news indeed, and it would have immediately translated into stock market weakness. In the event, it did not happen, and again, this is a very odd psychology. Although everybody expected it widely, and everybody is like, oh yeah, we knew this was about to happen, there is still tinges of relief in that acknowledgement. So that's good news that it
Oh,
wasn't.
I was just going to say the
Hmm,
reason why actually that might be that might be a thing is because um, the governor Andrew Bailey has been so useless in the past at actually conveying the what they're thinking, that actually now I guess that the market is maybe reticent to be quite so sure about the move. I think that's what it is, and I think there was something, wasn't there, about how the timing of the release of the minutes, because the central banks when they do the interest rate changes, especially the Fed, they don't release the minutes straight away
mhm.
because the idea is the move happens, everything you know, plays out. Then the minutes are brought in, and then the idea is it's all very calm. But I think that sometimes if you have the decision and you release the minutes at the same time, then panic ensues in the market. And yeah, but anyway, I think that it's interesting. This bit is interesting because of the whole thing of maybe it might have been a year. I can't remember when it was now. 6 months, a year ago, something like that. When he kind of indicated that it was going to be, that it was going to be one thing, I think he was indicating he was going to raise it, and then he didn't, or
Yeah,
say something like that.
yeah, yeah.
And so anyway, sorry. Okay, please carry on.
No, I just in recognition of what you said, the fact with the minutes, I think this is because when the information is being released and at the same time the minutes are being released, then the implicit assumption here is that the minutes are required immediately to explain the decision. And that is why the markets are getting extremely or immediately jittery when the minutes come with a statement. When the statement comes on its own, then basically it is implied that the minutes are going to give further substantiating information later, but that this explanation isn't needed immediately. And of course, as so often in Surrey, we have the president of the Bank of England Haters Club. And
Yeah.
in London, in the London studio, there's the president of the Brexit Haters Club. This is just by explanation of acknowledging any hidden bias of information.
I don't know how you guess that. I don't know how you would guess that I'm not a
don't
fan.
know, just wild, just stuff on the tag, Cool.
Yeah.
So anyway, where was I? Something about interest rates, right? So
Yeah.
I think I said that the news was greeted with a tinge of a hidden optimism that the worst scenario had in fact not transpired. So cool. So there is an element of positive news and an element of negative news here. The element of positive news is that the Bank of England sort of intimated with the statement, with the minutes, in fact, that we might have now reached the pinnacle of the interest rate increase cycle or step function, and that further interest rate increases may indeed not be necessary, implicitly saying that inflation is in fact now coming down. I mean, we see it is coming down from the peak levels which we've seen in October. That's obvious to everybody, but the point here is the message relates to the underlying dynamic, the momentum of inflation, and that is now beginning to be widely expected to be trending down towards the end of the year. So that's the good news. The not so good news is that this is not necessarily going to be commensurate with a reduction in interest rates, because that is, of course, what everybody has been hoping for. The Bank of England has sort of said, well, it hasn't said it literally, but it's sort of between the lines, it said further interest rate increases may actually be necessary, but it is also not going to be possible to reduce interest rates well into the next year. So if we get a decrease in inflation, well, that's obviously good for household budgets, but what we would really like is a decrease in interest rates. So
I was just going to say, the reason why I'm smiling is I'm just getting in my head this, like, maybe we will, maybe we won't. Who knows? It's like, I don't know. It was a Little Britain thing. Did you ever see that? You go, maybe you will, maybe I won't. I tell you through the medium of dance. Do you remember? I don't know if you remember that. That's a long time ago. But anyway, sorry. But most people listening to this, we have no idea what I'm talking about. So sorry. Again, I've just butted in again, haven't I? I'm sorry. I've spoilt your flow there. I've spoilt your flow. I'm sorry.
Rest assured, nobody's listening to this anymore.
No, that's true. Actually, it's true.
Basically it.
I think not even my mum's listening to this at this point. So
everybody has this sort of bias detection machine out, and so oh no, this is bad.
Yeah, okay.
Bank of England paranoia.
Yeah.
Well, I've completely lost my thread now. I think I wanted to slug off Labour. Oh yes, that's right. So basically, what I wanted to move on to is to say that Rishi Sunak is now in a position where he sort of getting worried that he may not actually be able to present to the voters next year, in election year, or it's the last year he can possibly call an election in. I mean, that's basically it. Next year is going to be the last year where he can call a general election. And so he must be getting worried that he's not going to present to the voters a situation where he can point to falling interest rates. What he probably can point to is that he might have been able to make good on his deliberate, explicit promise to have inflation by the end of this year. And so it's good news, but it's not quite as good news. And so what I was just pointing out by way of discussion, if we get a Labour government, then it is at least conceivable that a Labour government would be less resilient to demands of trade unions to increase wages, and an increase in wages would of course be again instrumental in supporting inflation, in raising inflation. And so the danger is that we are getting to a situation where inflation is falling. At some point next year, we're getting to the point where the Bank of England might be in a position to start lowering interest rates. And just around that time, we get a shift in government towards Labour, who might then be inclined to raise wages, both because the trade unions demand it, and also because they think, well, it's actually from a point of view in the economic cycle where we now are, not going to be quite as dangerous to do so. And so there are lots of ifs here, and you shouldn't do that sort of thing in a proper analysis. But what I would just wanted to point out in this reasoning is that also from a plausible development in the political cycle, I think we can expect interest rates to stay at a level of 5-ish percentage points for a longer period of time, maybe for between 12 and 18 months. But on the positive side, inflation will fall, and that will be a relief to household budgets, whether interest rates are dropping or not.
Fair enough. I mean, I think that the one of the reasons why, one of the sort of interesting talking points of this. I mean, I think that's really good. The timing of this is going to be quite interesting, isn't it? Is the how when will we be in a position to cut interest rates, and what Labour says in the lead up to the election, because and I wonder whether they are going to be pressured as to, or the shadow chancellor will be pressured into saying, what are you going to do? Are you going to increase public sector wages? And they'll probably try to get away with saying, well, we've not quite decided, or they'll answer a different question or something. But
yes.
And by the way, that's not just Labour. I mean, all politicians are taught not to answer the questions directly. They're taught to give the message that they have been given, and to give that in different ways. But anyway,
but it will still be interesting to see not just what they say, but also how they say it. Because
that's right. Yeah.
Politicians are always annoyingly vague and evasive about answers.
It's because they've been trained. They've been trained.
Absolutely, but they're less evasive about some answers and more evasive about others. So you can't really get a clear word out of a politician at the best of time, but you can get a less evasive answer or a more evasive answer, and that's the gradual, that's the color which we need to look for. So if Starmer is, or indeed the shadow chancellor is excessively evasive, as they were when they were being asked what they would do about this about 12 months ago, where they were basically saying that, well, we're all in the same boat, and the working people are in this boat, and the trade unions, and it just didn't really sound at all as if it was a useful or actionable response. What it was clearly an attempt at not alienating any one party. And it will be interesting to see what the answer is. Is it more evasive or is it less evasive?
Yeah, we'll see.
If it's less evasive, at least we know where they're going to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I
read politicians, I'm afraid.
Yeah, mind you, that it was really funny. I've got a friend who has, because of his job, been interviewed on TV quite a lot, and he had to have a lot of media training, and was saying that apparently, so I think um, they. I think interviewers find it easier to interview people who've had media training,
Mhm.
because they all know how to. It's a kind of a game, and they all know what they each side knows what they want to do. So although you'd think actually it's easier to interview someone who has never had any media training, apparently it's not, because you really don't know what's going to happen and how they're going to react. Whereas, most politicians, high up people in various companies and things, they get this training as a matter of course, and to make sure that they don't say anything that they shouldn't, that would cause all sorts of problems. But anyway, I always thought that's very interesting.
That's it's a podcast in its own right. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, I'm sure it
what
is.
I
Yeah.
would say is we still, these guys are our representative. They're our elected representatives,
Hmm.
and therefore we are both their paymasters
Mm-hmm.
and the bosses, and
Yeah.
they have to be accountable to
Mm.
us.
Yeah.
It is in fact not excusable for them to waffle and
Yeah.
evade answers, even
Yeah.
though that may well be their training to do so.
Yes, absolutely,
Um,
absolutely. And
anyway,
and sorry, yeah. The other thing I wanted to say was, while I was, writing Watson's Daily today, I forgot which newspaper it was in, but there was a really quite sad case, and then this is why I think this is what brings home. This is why this chat that we do about the chat that we do about inflation and interest rates is so important, and what brings it home is there was this guy. I forgot what job it was. It was a pretty good job. He was getting 80 grand a year, and he is seriously considering doing a delivery type job as well as his main job, because he can't, because of prices and bills, etc., have all gone up so much that he can't do anything. So he is the only. He's got a family. He's the breadwinner in that household. Now, he said normally 80 grand covers pretty much everything, or it covers everything and then some.
and then some, yeah.
And
Exactly.
so when you consider that, you've got someone who's on a pretty decent whack, who's also thinking about going and being a delivery driver, you know that things aren't good. And he was saying in there that he was desperately looking at the news every day to see what analysts and things were saying about interest rates. So I know that, we kind of joke that we're always talking about it, but the fact of the matter is, it is so important at the moment, that's why we are spending time
Yes.
talking about the I word.
Indeed, and it's it's an interesting highlighted case, because £80,000 is of course a very good salary indeed.
Yeah.
Just to remind everybody that the national average earnings are at around £30,000. I think they're still at £28,000.
Yeah.
And so if you're struggling at 80k, guess what you're doing at 30k. Obviously, a lot of people who are breadwinners at 30k are also there are double breadwinners in the household. So maybe you are then at 60k or 50k, whatever. But even that is not as high as 80. So 80k is a very good salary indeed. And if you're struggling on that, then this brings home the extent of the crisis, and in particular what existential issues people face who are on average earnings. And my final comment is, if that is an average, just mathematically, it means that there is a lot of people who are below 30,000, and then you can see what the issues are. That's why it is, of course, important to talk about this, and this is why I thought the situation that inflation is now coming down, trending down, is indeed good news.
There we go. So there we go. So let's move on to the next topic conversation for today. So this is about how you may remember that China, I think it was a couple of years ago, they restricted children's game time to 3 hours per week. And it looks like they are going to continue with this. They are looking at, there are proposals to force makers to introduce a minor mode, as in for children, not people that get stuff out of the ground, and the minor mode, and that will set usage and time limits on devices. There may be scope for parents to allow, so if they've got a phone, they might allow certain functions. But anyway, the idea is to have kids playing fewer devices late at night. I must say, I did try to suggest a let's do China Week with my two kids, and let's just see how 3 hours a week, the suggestion of 3 hours a week, goes down. I don't know, this might surprise you, but actually it didn't go down very well. So I am thinking of reintroducing at least threatening China Week potentially for my kids. But anyway, parent wisdom aside, I think that this is very interesting, and I do think that it does make me wonder, is China going to be held back by this, in the sense that a lot of people who become, tech gurus, they start off with games, and then they make their own games, and then they get interested in how they're made and all this kind of thing. And then they're coding. And so when you consider that China they're trying to be at the, or they want to continue to be at the forefront of technology, they're being held back by American sanctions banning them from getting these advanced chips. So they're being held back by that. And it seems that they're almost, because of what they're doing with kids, it's almost like they're restricting themselves in terms of kids' interaction with tech. So I am wondering whether that is also going to hold China back potentially in the future. I don't think so, but I don't know. Maybe it will. But I thought it was an interesting subject. It is something that we don't really have here. I wonder whether it is going to become a thing, because the whole reason why it became a thing in China was there was a kid that played all the time and he died. And there was all this thing that President Xi Jinping was really objecting to. There were these things like computer game addiction camps, which showed you how to wean yourself off playing games. And he thought, to be honest, I kind of agree with him in this sense that, like, if the problem's that bad, you do need to do something about it. So anyway, I wonder what do you think of that, Ralph?
Well, yeah. It's an incredibly involved topic which has got a lot of layers. So before I go anywhere, can I just say that 3 hours a week, you can't survive on 3 hours a week gameplay. This is impossible. You need to basically play video games with a obsessive dedication. Basically, do it 7 hours at a time. This is
wow. Okay.
Of course, not something I might ever have done.
Of course, Ralph.
But I wasn't a minor when I did this. You see,
No.
I look back on weekends where I did nothing but playing games. And
Really?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Why do you think I'm so weird? And
no, you're not weird. So clearly, you're the poster boy for this.
I weaned myself off my addiction.
Yeah.
I found a cure. It's called marriage. That worked
Yeah.
very well.
Yeah. Is that all right? Okay. Okay. Fair
No,
enough.
joking aside, I did enjoy playing video games, and they are immersive and they are addictive and they draw you in. But I chose to play 7 hours and not do something else, and so that was all healthy even when I did it. But I can understand why people actually um, need to engage with the video game for more than 3 hours even at a time, because the
Mm.
gameplay is so immersive and it tells a narrative and a story, and you're in you in the narrative of the game, and it sort of takes on its own life,
Mm.
which is why if you are a minor, you may indeed not have the intellectual maturity, let's say, to self-regulate your exposure to video games. And then I think it is entirely justified, legitimate indeed, for an external body, let's say, to
Mm.
impose some sort of regulation. Now, this gets us straight to the topic at hand. China, of course, is an autocratic state, and they can basically regulate private life in whichever way they want, or at least to a much more incisive degree than we are able to do this in our democratic and therefore chaotic societies.
Mm.
But in our society, such a thing might actually come um, with a self-regulated angle from the manufacturers themselves. But that's not what we're discussing now. Going back to China. So when we are now in China in our chat, this is one level of regulating the tech industry, but it is a level which I sort of can understand. I can understand where the government might be coming from there, and it is in fact to protect the mental health of minors.
Mm.
But there are, of course, other levels, and this plays into other levels of centralist control of tech, which are no longer for the benefit of the protection of minors, but which are for the protection of the ideological purity of the message of the government. And so you do not have freedom, freedom of speech, the free exchange of opinions on platforms such as Twitter, which is of course now called X.
Mhm.
You have a China equivalent, but it is very highly state regulated.
Mm.
So that's another element of this. Yet another element is that the Chinese government is going to, or is effectively controlling the development and free proliferation of LLMs, large
Mhm.
language models such as ChatGPT, because they also cannot be controlled centrally.
Mm.
And finally, of course, you have a regulation of tech companies such as Alibaba, etc. They are sometimes more restrictive, sometimes less restrictive. So what is happening in China, therefore, I think, is the creation in general of a space in which especially a developing and potentially transformative sector such as tech sits quite uncomfortably. And that is why I would eventually agree with your suspicion that this might actually hold China back. Um, it it might hold the economy of China back precisely in a sphere which surely must be the next growth sector for the next decade.
Mm.
Because so far China have been extremely successful in
Mm.
fostering their economy through the injection of free market economic principles into an otherwise still tightly controlled autocratic state system. But they have been very successful in doing this. And now we may get to a state where a maintenance or maintaining of a austere centralist control will be detrimental to the further development of one of the sectors in a free economy that is the future growth sector, and that is tech. So yes, I mean, to that extent, I would agree. But going back to the original observation which we had, the particular idea that there is like a 3 hours restriction of gameplay for minors, we can quibble with whether it should be 3 hours or more, but the idea itself actually rings true with me. It's not a bad idea to find ways to protect the mental health of minors. As of course you said yourself, you might actually get
Do China Week.
introduce China Week into your
China
own
Week in the Watson household. Sorry, we've got to go by the rules, I'm afraid. 3 hours. So enjoy.
And this is not a democracy in our house.
Exactly. Actually, I've just got another. I mean, I'm going off in all sorts of tangents today, but I do remember because I'm not a gamer, and the reason why I'm not a gamer is because I get quite obsessed by things, and I played Tetris. This is a long time ago, and I became so obsessed with it. I played it a lot for a couple of days, and I did sleep and eat and stuff, and I did go to lectures and this was when I was at uni. However, I thought this is time to stop now because in my dreams, I dreamt that I was in a giant Tetris and that I was standing there and all these blocks were coming down and I was physically catching the blocks and then putting them and then trying to put them down, and they were coming faster and faster, and I was just getting more frenzied. And when I woke up that day, I thought, you know what, I'm not playing games again, and I haven't played really since then. So
I can also testify. Just one quick anecdote. I came out of a weekend of playing GPA. That's Grand Theft Auto.
Grand Theft Auto, yeah.
Whatever, one version of this. And
you robbed a bank?
Almost. I mean, this is exactly what I'm sort of talking about. And then I drove into the West End to meet a mate of mine. And I kid you not, this is real. I'm not inventing this. The first 10 minutes, the sort of traffic situation looked slightly unreal to me.
Wow.
I mean, after 16 hours, I mean, not in one go, but after two 8-hour stints of playing GTA non-stop, the sort of, I was sort of course, I knew that it was reality. I'm not saying I was somehow incapacitated there, but I was sort of thinking, ooh, there's like a Mercedes. I could sort of take over the Mercedes. I mean, joking to myself, but that I even had the thought in the first place. So there's no doubt to me that that exposure to the medium of games play does alter your perception of reality in some way.
No, interesting. So I think So anyway, maybe they are on the right track, but ultimately it might not be amazing for the economy. But then again, I suppose no one's ever really going to be able to prove it, are they really? But it sounds like it's a logical thing to do. Anyway, let's move on to the third and final topic today. So I thought this was a very interesting story of the week, and this was about a lawsuit that is being I don't know, drawn up, is that the right word expression, but against Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly and their very sort of much hyped weight loss drugs. Now, apparently, there's a company law firm called Morgan and Morgan, and they're acting on behalf of around 400 clients who have had problems with these weight loss drugs. Now, one of them, they use the example of one poor lady who she was put in hospital. She lost teeth because of vomiting. Now, I presume that's vomiting and hitting the ground or something. But I mean,
Mm.
apparently it is constant vomiting, and I mean, the title of this Financial Times article was "Lawsuit alleges blockbuster weight loss drugs caused stomach paralysis."
Yes.
So I mean, sounds extremely nasty, and I mean, the thing is that these weight loss drugs have suddenly become a massive thing, and
Mm.
there are estimates out there which say that the weight loss category of drugs will be worth 50 billion. That's $50 billion by 2030. So this is potentially a pivotal lawsuit, because this could really just nip things in the bud for weight loss drugs at the moment,
Mhm.
if they are found to be liable.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, what do you think?
Yes, I agree. I mean, let me introduce some deliciously technical sounding words into this
Yeah.
discussion. I'm just going to be in seventh heaven. This is the pharmaceutical industry, of which I know nothing. But
Hmm.
just a little bit of research before we chatting about this has revealed that these drugs are in fact anti-diabetes
Hmm.
drugs. And please, everybody, forgive me. I mean, really don't know much about this, but common sense would dictate that there is some connection between diabetes and being overweight.
Hmm.
And therefore, an anti-diabetes drug might well act towards reducing your weight and in this way tackling perhaps the source of the diabetes. This is my layman explanation of why these two uses of these drugs are correlated.
Hmm.
Now, looking at this, these things are called, this is going to be good. They're called GLP-1 agonists. That's the
Hmm.
sort of drug we're talking about here. And if you're juvenile like me, then you see immediately why this is amusing, because people are. No, I'm not going to go there. This is sounding much more funny in my own head because the agonist and the agony
Hmm.
relationship there. Cool. So GLP-1, GLP, it doesn't matter what it stands for, but this type of drug is administered for people who have diabetes. It is also given to people for the express purpose of reducing weight. Uh, Patients who qualify for this use need to have a BMI of 30 or higher. Now, let's just put this in perspective, because that's not actually all that much. I'm 180, which is 6 foot in old money, and I'm something like 80 kilograms or a bit more, 82. In fact, I've just had a pizza, so probably 82. And if if I was 30 BMI, I'd be something like 100 kilos. So
Hmm.
there's obviously a difference there, but a person who's 180 tall, 6 foot, and wears 100 kilo, I mean, you wouldn't really think that that person is hugely overweight, and yet they already qualify for the administration of such a drug
Hmm.
for the purposes of weight loss. The reason why I say all this is only to identify the potential population who has been taking these drugs, and therefore the potential size and extent of this lawsuit and where this might actually go. So the second thing I'd like to say is that there are some drugs within that bucket who are approved for diabetes and weight loss, and there are only some who are approved for diabetes only and not weight loss. The ones which are approved for diabetes but not for weight loss are, in fact, and here it comes, Ozempic and
Hmm.
one other. And Ozempic is the drug which is being targeted here by this lawsuit.
Hmm.
Now, the lawsuit is basically saying that the prescription of the drug for the purpose of weight loss should have been made only when accompanied by an explicit warning that this drug might actually lead to side effects if used for weight loss and not for people who are diabetic. And that is basically the hope of the lawyer. It's more than hope. They are very confident that they can actually bring this lawsuit and win the lawsuit, because it is a failure to warn, I believe is the technical term in the legal community. Um, and if indeed this is going to be successful, then they are going to be the floodgates would open, and there are going to be class actions which would then follow this one. This one, I believe, is 400 people are in this class action, and then obviously, given what I just sort of indicated of what the population might be who are taking this drug for weight loss and not for diabetes, this could actually be the source of a, well, I mean, depending on which side of the commercial transaction you sit, I mean, the source of a good revenue flow into the coffers of law firms, but clearly it might actually hit the companies which are producing and selling these drugs in a very potent manner indeed.
I mean, yeah, it's I mean, it does sound awful, what's happening to these people. And obviously, yes, this, but but the thing is that I don't know. This does make you wonder about the approval process generally. I mean, I know that often what happens with drugs is, they go through all these processes which take absolutely years and years and years to work through. And then sometimes you can then fast track a drug through the approval process if you can find another use for it. So, but then obviously in this case, that's not gone particularly well. So, but anyway, we'll see what happens there. It's one of those things. It'll be ongoing, but it's going to be very expensive, I think.
Yeah, one doesn't quite know how exactly this works because, as I said, I mean, I looked at the FDA website and some other websites, and it looks as if the drugs are not FDA approved for weight loss. But the lawyers are stating that, albeit that is the case, they should also be coming with a warning that indeed that if used for weight loss, then they would actually potentially have severe side effects. And it is that failure to warn which then actually extend to the practice of general practitioners in well, that's what they call them in the UK. I don't know what they're called in the US. General practitioners basically prescribing these drugs for weight loss, and they would not be to blame because they are just basically saying, well, there's nothing here. I mean, there's no warning by the FDA. And therefore I can freely prescribe this. I don't quite know how this works legally, as you can all tell, but what I believe one needs to have for the class action to be successful and for the liability to come back to the companies is that it is not the general practitioner prescribing these drugs against better knowledge that they are not FDA approved. And you need to have well, I'm repeating this now, the failure to warn, and that must be strong enough to come back to lay the liabilities at the door of the companies in question. That's how this lawsuit will. These are the lines along which I would expect the lawsuit to develop.
Well, there we go. I mean, I think we might as well end on that point. But yeah, it's been well. There's never a dull week. So much been happening. It's been a really big week for lots of results. Really, again, a bit like last week. So yes. But anyway, thank you very much, Ralph, for your insights and your thoughts, and thank you very much for the for listeners, viewers of this vodcast, whatever you want to call it, cast, and have a great day, evening, weekend, whatever it is that you're doing when you're listening to this.
Don't play
Thanks
too
very
much
much.
video games.
Okay, yeah, that's
Thanks,
right. You heard
guys.
it here.
Yeah,
Bye. Forget we're going to
thanks.
do China. We're going to do China Week
China
next
week.
week. See
China
ya.
week.
Bye. Bye.
See you guys. Thank you.